So the last video I posted was a blind test between the GH5 and the original Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, but in this video we'll do a more in-depth comparison between the two cameras. They are two very different cameras, but in the end they both shoot video, so why not compare them? The GH5 was released in 2017, while the Pocket was released in 2013, so none of the cameras are exactly brand new, but the GH5 still has 4 years on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera. So let's start with a side-by-side comparison between the two cameras. I'll use the same footage as in my last video, which was the blind test, but this time it won't be blind. And if you watched that video, camera A was the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera and camera B was the GH5. But let's roll the footage. In the first shot, the focus of the GH5 was slightly off, so I apologize for that. The focus was lying more towards the far eye than the near eye. For the test, both cameras were shot at the same white balance and exposure, using the same aperture. Both cameras had a 0.71 Speedbooster, but the GH5 used a 35mm lens, while the Pocket used a 24mm lens. This is to compensate for the difference in sensor size. Except for the shot of the beer. To be honest, I don't really remember what focal length that was shot at. And afterwards I matched both cameras in DaVinci Resolve. The straight out of the camera look would be completely different to the matched look, but something that can't be hidden when matching the footage is the moire of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera. No matter how well you match the footage, that will always be a dead giveaway for me at least. But to link this back to the blind test, a lot of people were saying that A was the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, which is correct. But I also saw quite a few people who said that A was the GH5, and I think that says a lot about what you can do with these cameras in the grade. Do you want to shoot slow-mo? Well, the GH5 can shoot 4K up to 60 FPS and 1080p up to 120 frames per second, although at 180 frames per second it is quite soft. And all the Pocket will do is 1080p up to 30 frames per second. So if you want to shoot higher frame rates and slow motion, then GH5 is the clear winner here. They are two very different cameras, and here's where it shows. The GH5 has multiple dials and buttons, which can also be custom mapped to functions of your choosing. The Pocket camera can't even change white balance or ISO without going into the menu. The GH5 has a fully articulating flip screen, and the Pocket camera basically requires an external monitor to be able to view your footage. It has a built-in screen, but it's fixed, it's small, and it's pretty dim as well. The GH5 has a mobile app which will allow you to control and monitor the camera remotely. The GH5's body is more ergonomical and easier to grip, although heavier and bigger. I'm not going to tell you which camera has the better ISO performance, I'll leave that up to you. So instead I'll just show you a few tests. In this first test I've actually paired the GH5's ISO 400 with the Pocket's ISO 800 and so on. This is because when I rated the camera at 800 and exposed using my light meter, the image actually turned out to be one stop underexposed. And just to avoid any confusion, I had already compensated for the use of a Speedbooster. But if I instead used ISO 400 on the meter while leaving the camera at ISO 800 and exposed using my meter, then middle gray was placed roughly around 38 IRE, which is where middle gray should land using Blackmagic film. And just to clarify that this wasn't an issue with the light meter, when using it with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K or the GH5, the light meter turned out to be accurate. So the Pocket's 800 ISO actually gives the same exposure as ISO 400. So therefore I matched the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera's ISO 800 to the GH5's 400 in these tests. They both use the same aperture and shutter, allowing the same amount of light to enter both cameras. So let's look at the test. Which of the cameras handles higher ISOs better, I'll leave up to you. Well, let's look at another test where I actually match ISO 400 to ISO 400 and so on. So what about codecs? The GH5 can shoot internal 4K 10-bit up to 30 FPS and up to 60 FPS if you use 1080p. Any higher than that and it's 8-bit. Unless you're using an external recorder, in that case you can shoot 4K up to 60 FPS in 10-bit. When shooting internally you're using an H.264 compression. The Pocket on the other hand can record lossless CinemaDNG Raw 12-bit or different flavors of ProRes in 10-bit. The GH5 has continuous autofocus for a video, and the Pocket has a push autofocus, but nothing that is continuous. The GH5 clearly has the better autofocus out of the two, but it still isn't something that I would rely on for professional video work. I've used both cameras as completely manual focus cameras. The GH5 has an amazing IBIS, something that's hard to go back from once you've gotten used to it. The Pocket on the other hand has no IBIS, no stabilization of any kind, so if you use it handheld with a non-stabilized lens, just as it is with a small camera body, you'll get those ugly micro jitters. So you'll need to rig the camera up a bit if you want a more pleasing handheld look. The GH5 can give you up to 2 hours per battery and also has the option of using a battery grip, which would double that time. For the Pocket, I can't speak from experience since the internal batteries on my camera isn't working, so I've always used external power to power the camera. But from what I've heard, you get roughly 15 to 30 minutes per battery, so I would recommend using some kind of external power solution for that camera. Since I no longer have my GH5, I can't record a new direct comparison between the two, but I can use a segment from an old video and then record a new one with the Pocket, placing the microphone in roughly the same position. The old video will already have its sound processed, so I'll do the same with the Pocket camera. So here's the two sound clips. If you enjoy watching filmmaking content on YouTube, you probably heard of the word cinematic. This is an audio test of the preamps in the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, the original. So which sounds better to you? The GH5 also has the option of using an accessory which will give you XLR inputs. The GH5 has a micro four thirds sensor, and the Pocket uses a micro four thirds mount, but the sensor in it is actually a super 16mm sensor size. I've used both cameras with speed boosters, effectively giving the GH5 a super 35mm sensor and the Pocket a MFT sized sensor. In practice, this roughly equates to using a 25mm on the Pocket to match the framing of a 35mm on the GH5. And a 35mm to match a 50, and so on. Both cameras use SD cards. The GH5 has 2 slots, which can be used to either give you an instant backup or to use relay recording, which will allow you to hot swap the cards mid-recording. With a V-rated card you can almost record all formats on the GH5, all except for the 400 megabits all-I 4K recording. For that you'll need a V60 card or faster. The Pocket, on the other hand, is very picky about what cards will work, especially if you want to record in RAW. For ProRes I've gotten basically all my cards to work, but you probably want at least a V30 card in terms of speed. For RAW, Blackmagic recommends the old discontinued SanDisk Extreme Pro 95 megabits per second, and not the newer V30 rated versions of those cards. Those cards can be quite difficult to get a hold of since you can only buy them used, but I've heard some people report success with the Kingston Canvas React cards. If you look at the comment sections of my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera in 2020 video, there's a discussion going on there, but since I haven't used the card myself, I can't confirm if it works or not. Both cameras use HDMI for external monitoring. The GH5 has a full-sized HDMI, while the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera has a micro-sized HDMI. Both cameras has 3.5mm mic inputs and headphone out. The GH5 has a USB-C, which can be used to connect it to a computer. However, it will not charge the batteries or power the camera. If you want external power, you have to use a dummy battery. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, on the other hand, has a 12-volt input, so you don't have to use dummy batteries if you want external power for that camera. And on top of that, they both have a port for remote control. So, do you own any of the cameras? Have you tried them out? What are your opinions on Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera, the original, versus the GH5? Let me know in the comments down below. But that pretty much wraps it up for this video. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see some more, and I'll see you next time.